My name is Samantha Reynolds, and on my 28th birthday, I walked into what I thought was a rare moment of family warmth, only to realize I'd been invited to my own financial ambush. It started with a text from my father, Richard. "We want to host your birthday dinner. It's a milestone year." That message alone should have raised red flags. For the past 10 years, birthdays in the Reynolds-Mitchell household meant a generic gift card if I was lucky, and the kind of stiff phone call that felt more like an obligation than love. But now suddenly they were planning a family celebration. Still, a part of me hoped this meant something. That maybe my father had remembered the daughter he once coached through algebra and cheered for at state spelling bees. I wore a simple navy dress and drove my sensible Honda Civic to the mansion they now called home. It was their third upgrade since my father married Diane. All white marble crystal chandeliers and just enough mirrors to reflect their inflated self-image from every angle. When I stepped through the massive front door, Diane gave me one of her air kisses lips hovering 2 inches from my cheek. Samantha, that outfit is so practical. She was wearing a body-hugging designer dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent. And then came Rebecca, my stepsister, my mirror twin in age, but that's where the similarities ended. Rebecca walked in like she owned the place, hips swaying, diamonds twinkling on her ears and wrist. The scent of her overpriced perfume hit before she even said, "Happy birthday, sis." "Thanks," I replied, offering a polite smile. Her red dress looked like it belonged on a runway. Mine came from a department store clearance rack. I didn't care. I had just been promoted to lead analyst at a financial firm in the city. That mattered more than whatever glitter she wore. We sat for drinks in the living room. Dad poured me a glass of wine with a hand that trembled slightly. I noticed Diane glancing toward Rebecca, who gave her a quick, subtle nod. Something unspoken was happening, and I wasn't in on it. "So how's your job, Samantha? I was promoted to lead a new team last quarter," I said. "It's been rewarding. We're working on sustainability investment models." "Tyler plays golf," Dad interrupted, turning to Rebecca's boyfriend. "Shot a 74 last weekend, isn't that right, son?" Tyler grinned and gave me a firm, empty handshake. "So you're the smart sister." The food was tasteless, or maybe it was just my growing suspicion that dulled my senses. Diane refilled her wine 3 times during dinner. Rebecca kept dabbing her eyes with a tissue like she was warming up for a performance. And Dad, he was checking his watch like he was waiting for something big to happen. I excused myself to the bathroom. On the way back, I passed the dining room door just as I heard my father's low voice. "Just make sure she understands there's no other option." "But what if she won't?" Diane replied. They fell silent when I walked in. Everyone returned to their seats. The tension had been served right alongside the roast chicken. Then, as the plates were cleared, my father tapped his water glass with a spoon. The sound echoed like a gavel in a courtroom. "Before we have cake, I'd like to make a toast." I braced myself. To Samantha, he began raising his glass on her 28th birthday, a day your mother and I looked forward to from the moment you were born. There was a pause, and then his tone shifted. "Today isn't just another birthday, it's the day you gain access to your inheritance. And in this family, we believe in supporting each other, especially when one of us is in trouble." Rebecca sniffled. Perfectly timed. Tyler wrapped his arm around her shoulders. Samantha, Dad, continued, "Rebecca's in danger. She's in debt to some very dangerous people." I blinked, unsure whether to laugh or call the police. "She has a gambling addiction," he said gravely. "She owes $500,000, the exact amount of your inheritance." There it was, the real reason for the birthday dinner, the reason the cake was still in its plastic container, the reason the gifts were untouched, and the reason my stomach had been twisting since I walked in the door. "We want you to loan her the money," Dad said, "just until she's back on her feet. Your mother would have wanted this." Diane added, her voice coated in false warmth. My blood turned to ice. "I won't do it," I said flatly. The silence that followed was deeper than shock. It was insulted entitlement. My father's jaw clenched. Diane's mouth twitched in disgust. Rebecca's tears dried up instantly. "You selfish little," she started. "You're no longer part of this family," my father said, pointing a finger. "If you walk out that door," I stood up. "I haven't been part of this family since Mom died. The difference is now I accept it." And I walked out, past the untouched cake, past the expensive handbags and hollow hearts, out into the night. What I didn't know then was that they weren't finished, and the next move would be far more dangerous than a dinner table ambush. 8 days after that birthday dinner disaster, I found my father waiting for me in the underground parking garage of my office building, like something out of a cheap thriller. He was leaning against my car, holding a thick envelope, dressed in a tailored suit, but with the kind of expression that tells you you're not here for pleasantries. "We need to talk," he said flatly. "Whatever you have to say, you can say it here," I replied, keys clenched between my fingers. "I was hoping we could do this civilly." He sighed. "But I can't wait any longer." This he held out. The envelope is a petition for guardianship. "I'm filing tomorrow." I stared at him, not speaking, not blinking. "You're claiming I'm mentally unfit." He nodded businesslike, like he was discussing a development zoning request. "It's already been reviewed by legal. The documents include a psychiatric evaluation, testimonies from family members, and evidence of erratic behavior. I wanted to give you a chance to avoid all this. Just sign over the inheritance." He actually said that. "You're blackmailing me," I whispered. "I'm protecting you," he replied. I didn't say another word. I drove straight to Martin Sullivan, my mother's longtime lawyer, and the man who had helped her set up the trust. Martin's office had already closed for the day, but his assistant saw my face and buzzed me in. I slammed the envelope on his desk and told him everything. "They're trying to declare me mentally incompetent to take control of my inheritance." He opened the documents and began flipping through them. His frown deepened with every page. "This is aggressive," he murmured. "They've even included a psychiatric evaluation from someone named Dr. Harold Winters. Never met him." "Of course you haven't," Martin said. "He retired 2 years ago, moved to Arizona. I'll call him tomorrow." He looked at me. "Samantha, we're going to fight this. But you need to understand allegations like this, no matter how absurd, can freeze your assets. Courts are cautious. We need to act fast." What followed were the most emotionally grueling weeks of my life. First, we secured my inheritance. Martin transferred the funds into legally shielded accounts they couldn't touch, even with a court order. Then we went on offense. I underwent a full psychological evaluation by Dr. Catherine Jenkins, a highly respected psychiatrist Martin had worked with in other guardianship cases. "You're not unstable," she said after our second session. "You're furious, and you should be." Her formal report would later describe me as emotionally resilient, cognitively sound, and possessing strong judgment and executive function, the exact opposite of what my father was claiming. Next, I collected character statements from friends, co-workers, and neighbors. My boss, Jessica, provided a glowing letter. Samantha manages a team of 10, oversees multi-million-dollar portfolios, and maintains exceptional judgment under pressure. But the most critical turn came when Martin's team began digging into my father's story. If they were going to come after me legally, I needed evidence that this was more than family tension. I needed proof of intent to defraud. And oh, did we find it? Michael Grayson, a financial investigator Martin recommended, began pulling public records, credit reports, business filings, property deeds, tax records. What he uncovered painted a picture more desperate than I imagined. My father's real estate development company drowning in debt. Their home remortgaged twice. Credit cards maxed out. Rebecca spending tens of thousands a month designer bags, $5,000 spa weekends, and a $12,000 Chanel handbag posted to Instagram just 2 days after the dinner where she was supposedly in mortal danger. There was no gambling debt, no gangsters knocking on their door, just lies. Fabricated pressure, manufactured urgency, manipulation posing as concern. "They made it all up," Michael said, showing me spreadsheets and screenshots. This is about using your inheritance to bail themselves out. Worse, I wasn't the first. Martin finally told me something he'd long kept quiet after my mother's death. My father had tried the same thing with my grandmother, my mom's mother. He attempted to claim property, insisting my mother had promised it to him verbally. When my grandmother refused, he threatened legal action. Sound familiar? Why didn't anyone tell me? I asked. You were 17, Martin said. Everyone thought it best to shield you. And then came the bombshell. Tyler, Rebecca's boyfriend. He reached out to me unexpectedly. We broke up, he said, and I want to clear the air. He confirmed everything. The tears, the story, the exact words to use at dinner, all scripted. Rebecca rehearsed her lines. She told me you'd cave like always. He provided text messages, screenshots, voicemails, even one of Rebecca laughing and saying, if Samantha doesn't give us the money, Dad's ready to go nuclear. I had what I needed. Documents, statements, recordings, testimony. Now it was time to use it. When I received the invitation to a family meeting at my Aunt Sarah's house, I didn't need to ask what it was about. The phrasing in Dad's email was carefully curated to sound concerned. We've asked a few close relatives to come together in support of your healing. We hope you'll join us for a heartfelt discussion about your well-being. Heartfelt, right? They'd failed to pressure me at my birthday dinner. They'd failed with legal threats and forged diagnoses. Now they were going to try the court of public opinion, or rather the family echo chamber. What they didn't know was I was coming armed. Martin arrived 10 minutes before I did, carrying a slim leather folder. Inside was the condensed version of the case we'd spent weeks building: forged documents, fraudulent financial records, and damning communications. We parked across the street. I could see silhouettes through the living room window. Dad pacing Diane, adjusting throw pillows, Rebecca sitting stiffly in the center of the couch. Remember, Martin said, don't get emotional. Let the truth do the damage. I'm ready. Aunt Sarah answered the door. She looked worried. I didn't know what this was really about, Samantha, she whispered as she hugged me. But I want you to know I'm on your side. The room was arranged like a tribunal. One armchair in the center, clearly intended for me, facing two sofas where Dad, Diane, Rebecca, and Uncle James already sat. Cousin Thomas and his wife Beth flanked them, looking nervous. Martin stood quietly at my side. His presence unsettled Dad immediately. This is a family matter, Dad said coldly. Legal counsel isn't necessary. Martin was my mother's lawyer, I replied evenly, and he's a family friend. He stays. Dad gave a tight nod. Fine, please take a seat. I sat. We've asked everyone here because we're genuinely concerned about Samantha. Dad began tone somber. She's exhibited behaviors similar to her late mother during Eleanor's illness: paranoia, withdrawal, erratic decision-making. Diane added her syrupy voice. We just want what's best for her until she can get the help she needs. Rebecca sniffled on cue. We're really worried about you, sis. Dad passed around copies of the psychiatric evaluation, the forged one, along with statements he'd gathered. People read silently, eyebrows furrowed. The setup was complete, until I pulled out my own folder. Would you like to hear my side now? I asked calmly. Of course, Aunt Sarah said immediately. That's why we're here. I stood my voice clear. Everything in that folder is a lie. Gasps. Rebecca paled. That psychiatric evaluation forged. Dr. Harold Winters lives in Arizona. He never met me, never signed anything. I have his notarized affidavit right here. I passed the document to Uncle James. He scanned it, face darkening. The signature's dated after his retirement, he muttered. Regardless of technical issues, Diane rushed in. Our concerns are genuine. Really, I replied, eyes locked on hers. Then explain this. I handed out financial summaries, Michael Grayson's report. My father and Diane are over $700,000 in debt. 2 mortgages, maxed out cards, a business on the brink. This isn't about concern, it's about cash. Dead silence. Rebecca's gambling problem. I continued. Fiction. She's been spending thousands a month designer clothes, luxury resorts, cosmetic surgery. Here are her credit card statements. I handed them out. Rebecca's face turned crimson. She stood abruptly. This is harassment. These are charges on cards in Dad's name, I said, which he planned to pay off with my inheritance. Diane opened her mouth, but I cut her off with a final blow. This email chain between my father and Diane shows the plan pressure me into signing over my trust. If I refused file for guardianship, it even mentions using Dr. Reynolds, who owes them a favor, to fake a diagnosis. I handed the emails to Thomas. He looked up after reading them, visibly shaken. This is calculated. This isn't concern. This is premeditated fraud. You took those emails out of context, Dad muttered weakly. What possible context justifies falsifying mental health evaluations? Aunt Sarah snapped. Uncle James stood abruptly. You tried to steal Eleanor's legacy from her daughter. Dad tried to protest, but I pulled the final trump card. This letter, I said, holding up a sealed envelope, was written by my mother, to be opened only in the event her trust was ever contested. Martin nodded. He had kept it sealed in his office all these years. I broke the wax. To whom it may concern, I read aloud. Let me be absolutely clear, the money in Samantha's trust is for her future alone. It is not to be used by Richard or any future spouse or stepchild. If he has mismanaged his own assets, that is not Samantha's burden to bear. By the time I finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. I believe this meeting is over, Martin said, standing. But I wasn't done. You have 24 hours to withdraw your guardianship petition, I said to my father. If you don't, I go to the district attorney. That forged evaluation alone is enough for criminal charges. Dad looked like he'd been slapped. You wouldn't. I absolutely would. You're destroying this family, Diane snapped. No, I replied. You did. When you tried to erase everything my mother gave me. I turned to the others. I'm sorry you were dragged into this, but I had to defend myself, and now I'm done. I walked out, Martin beside me. I didn't look back, but in my chest, for the first time in years, was something solid, something strong, not revenge, not victory, self-respect. The guardianship petition was withdrawn the next morning. No apology, no explanation. Just a terse email from my father's lawyer, cold and clinical effective. Immediately our client withdraws all claims pertaining to the proposed guardianship of Samantha Reynolds. It was over, at least legally. Emotionally. That was a longer journey. Diane texted me a week later, a message so backhanded it could have sliced glass. We only wanted what was best for the family. Someday you'll understand. Love, Diane. I stared at the screen for a while, then deleted it. Some bridges don't just burn, they collapse into the ocean and you let them sink. Rebecca, unsurprisingly, went the opposite direction. Her voicemails, 3 of them, arrived in rapid succession, each more unhinged than the last. You've ruined everything. Dad and Mom are fighting constantly, the bank's threatening foreclosure, and somehow I'm the villain. I blocked her number. Their implosion wasn't mine to manage anymore. With Martin's help, I established a revocable trust, ensuring that no one, no matter how manipulative, could ever attempt to seize my finances again. The funds were restructured, diversified, and protected. The best revenge, Martin told me, is using that money exactly as your mother wanted to secure your future. And that's exactly what I did. I purchased a modest 3-bedroom house in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood. Nothing flashy, just solid, safe. With a garden my mother would have adored. When I signed the closing documents, I felt something I hadn't felt since I was 16, stability. Then I turned to the investment idea that had been forming in the back of my mind for years, a financial literacy program designed specifically for young adults transitioning out of foster care. I had learned the hard way how easily financial ignorance could be weaponized, how vulnerability made you a target. I wanted to offer the kind of knowledge my mother gave me to those who needed it most. Martin looked over the business proposal and smiled. Your mother's legacy, protecting not just you, but others too. That's powerful symmetry, Samantha. As I rebuilt, something surprising happened. Family reappeared. But not the ones who tried to steal from me, the ones I thought I'd lost when Mom died. Uncle James and Aunt Sarah started inviting me for Sunday dinners. We shared stories I hadn't heard in years, memories of my mom as a child, a teenager, a young woman before she was Mom. "We should have stayed in your life," Sarah said one evening, voice low with guilt. "We let Richard push us away. We thought we were protecting you, but we failed. What matters is that you're here now," I replied. That simple truth mended more than a decade of distance. Cousin Patricia, who had fought off my father's inheritance games years before, also reached out. We'd barely spoken before. Now she became my unexpected mentor. The hardest part isn't proving they lied, she told me over coffee. It's realizing they may never admit it, that your healing can't depend on their remorse. And she was right. I stopped hoping for apologies, stopped wondering if Rebecca regretted anything or if my father ever missed me. I wasn't waiting for closure anymore. I was building my own. Professionally, I expected my reputation might take a hit. After all, high-conflict family drama and legal proceedings aren't great resume boosters. But the opposite happened. At my next performance review, my boss looked me straight in the eyes and said, "You managed a legal crisis, protected your assets, and led your team through a tough quarter without missing a beat. That's exactly the kind of leadership we reward." I was promoted to senior financial analyst, overseeing not just portfolios, but people. It wasn't just a title. It was proof that I wasn't broken, that I wasn't irrational, that I wasn't the girl who would cave just to keep the peace. Therapy helped too. Dr. Jenkins, who had conducted my evaluation during the case, agreed to take me on as a patient. Her sessions weren't about processing the legal side of things. They were about the quiet, insidious damage that family betrayal leaves behind. Family estrangement carries its own form of grief, she explained. You're mourning not just who they were, but who you hoped they could be. And she was right. The grief came in waves. Some days I missed my father, not the man who threatened me, but the one who taught me to fish, who carried me on his shoulders after piano recitals. Other days I felt nothing but cold resolve, but most days I felt free. I no longer walked on eggshells wondering when the next emotional landmine would explode. I no longer felt the sting of being less than Rebecca. I no longer tried to prove I was worthy of being loved the way she was handed everything. And slowly, I stopped flinching when my phone buzzed, because I knew whoever was calling, I was in control now. A year passed, quietly, peacefully. I celebrated my 29th birthday with friends, not family. A small dinner at my home, fairy lights in the garden, homemade pasta, and a chocolate cake that I actually got to eat. No staged toasts, no surprise paperwork, no half-hearted presents masking legal threats, just laughter and warmth and choice. For the first time in my adult life, I chose who sat at my table. My work in financial education began to grow. The pilot program I started, Secure Start, expanded into 2 more cities. We partnered with local nonprofits and youth organizations, giving real-world financial tools to young adults who'd never had guidance on credit savings or setting boundaries. I met teenagers who reminded me of myself, fierce on the outside, scared on the inside, wanting so badly to be self-sufficient but never taught how. "You're the first person who's explained this without making me feel dumb," one girl said. After a budgeting workshop, "That's because you're not," I told her. "You've just never had someone show you the game." And that was the truth. So much of what my family tried to weaponize against me, financial literacy, emotional regulation, documentation, it had all come from my mother. Eleanor Reynolds had built a firewall around her daughter before she ever got sick. She had quietly, carefully constructed a defense system that would one day save me not just from poverty, but from the people who called themselves family. One afternoon, while clearing out storage boxes, I found a photograph I hadn't seen in years. Dad and me at the lake. I was maybe 9. He was crouched beside me, helping me bait a hook. We were both laughing. The memory hit hard. Because that version of him, the man who smiled at me without agenda, who clapped the loudest at school plays, who rubbed my back when I had the flu that man existed. He just disappeared. Whether it was greed, grief, or Diane's influence, I don't know. And I've stopped trying to figure it out. I let myself cry. Not for the father I battled in court, but for the one who once braided my hair and said I was his whole world. Grief doesn't always scream. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it sits beside you while you hold an old photo and finally admit he's gone. And he's not coming back, not by death, but by choice. About 18 months after the tribunal, Tyler reached out again. Rebecca's ex. He was in town, said he had a job interview, wanted to grab coffee. Curious, I agreed. We met at a little place near the lake. Same lake from the photo. He looked thinner, humbled, less polished than before. Rebecca and your parents? He started. Not my parents, I corrected gently. He nodded. They're getting divorced, he said. The financial mess finally caught up. House is in foreclosure. Rebecca's working at a boutique now, hourly, no benefits. He stirred his coffee. I'm not telling you this to make you feel sorry for them, he added. Just figured, you deserve to know the fallout. I appreciated the honesty, but I didn't feel vindicated or vengeful, just released. They made their choices, I said. Now they're living with the consequences. That's not my responsibility anymore. Tyler looked at me thoughtfully. I've never told anyone this, but the way you handled that whole situation, it made me rethink how I let people treat me. I got out of a toxic job, started over. He gave a small smile. So thanks, I guess, for standing your ground. It rippled further than you know. I nodded, sipping my tea, letting the breeze wash over me, letting it all go. By the time I turned 30, I had everything I'd once been told I didn't deserve: a home, financial freedom, a career I loved, a community that valued me, peace. Not the kind that's handed to you with strings attached, but the kind you build brick by brick after tearing down the house that tried to bury you. I hadn't just escaped a betrayal, I'd transformed it. People still ask, would you ever forgive them? And I always say the same thing. Forgiveness is personal. It's not about saying what they did was okay. It's about refusing to carry it anymore. So yes, I've forgiven them. Not because they apologized, not because they changed, but because I changed. Because I grew into someone who no longer needs their approval or their version of love. Because I finally understand what my mother meant when she said, "Protect yourself first, Sammy." No matter how much you love someone, they say betrayal leaves scars. But what they don't tell you is that those scars can become armor, the kind that doesn't harden you but teaches you where your boundaries are and how to protect them. By the time I looked back on it all, from the birthday ambush to the court petitions, the forged diagnosis, the tribunal, I realized something profound. I hadn't just defended myself. I'd redefined myself. The inheritance my mother left behind was supposed to be a gift, a cushion, a safety net. But it ended up being a test, not just of willpower, but of identity. My father thought I would fold. Diane thought I'd be too polite. Rebecca thought I'd be too afraid. And maybe a younger version of me would have been. But grief changes you. It carves you out in ways you don't notice until someone tries to fill the space with lies. And when they tried, when they fabricated diagnoses, when they rehearsed threats, when they weaponized family loyalty, what they didn't realize was that every move they made strengthened my resolve. Because I wasn't just protecting money, I was protecting the last living proof of my mother's love. And I wasn't going to let anyone take that from me. Over time, the noise faded. Rebecca's online presence went quiet. No more extravagant vacations. No tagged posts of $1, $200 handbags or Maldives villas. Diane retreated into obscurity after the divorce. Her name disappeared from Dad's company filings. And my father, I have no idea where he is now. The last I heard, he was living in a condo outside Sarasota, allegedly trying to start over. But me, I stayed. Not stuck. Rooted. I turned my experience into a tool, used it to educate, empower, and advocate. Secure Start became more than a program. It became a movement. And somewhere along the way, I stopped defining myself by what I had to survive. Instead, I started measuring life by what I could build. A few months ago, I was invited to speak at a local university for their Women in Finance initiative. It was supposed to be a 30-minute Q&A. It turned into a 2-hour event. One student asked me, "How did you know you were strong enough to fight back?" And I told her the truth. I didn't. Not at first, but every time I didn't back down, I became stronger. You build courage by using it, especially when you feel like you don't have any left. I've learned that family isn't about blood. It's about choice, about who shows up when you're not useful to them, who roots for you when you're winning and holds you when you're not, who never asks you to shrink so they can feel bigger. The people I now call family. They didn't grow up with me. They didn't share childhood bedrooms or holiday traditions, but they've seen me at my most vulnerable and stood beside me anyway. That's what real family does. On the anniversary of my mother's passing, I planted white gardenias in the backyard of the house I now own. She used to keep a pot of them outside our apartment window when I was little, said they were quiet flowers with strong roots. That always stuck with me. As I knelt in the soil sun warm on my shoulders, I whispered, "Thank you, Mom. I get it now." Because I did. I finally understood the full power of what she left me. Not just money, not just legal safeguards, but a model of dignity, foresight, and quiet strength. So if you've made it this far and you've ever felt like the invisible one in your family, the one expected to stay quiet, to keep giving, to carry the weight without breaking, let me say this: you're not alone. And you are not selfish for setting boundaries. You are not ungrateful for saying no. You are not unstable for protecting your peace. You are not dramatic for wanting better. You are entitled to your truth. And if speaking, it shakes the ground beneath the people who benefit from your silence, let it shake, let them fall, then build something stronger in its place. Have you ever had to stand up to family who tried to take advantage of you? Share your story in the comments below, because someone else out there might need to know they're not the only one. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more stories of resilience, growth, and real-life redemption. Because sometimes the family we choose is more valuable than the one we're born into. And sometimes the most radical thing you can do is finally protect yourself the way no one else would. Thank you for listening. I'm Samantha Reynolds, and I am finally free.